Well, good morning. This is Pam Noble, and I am the managing partner at TCG, and I focus on our diversity, equity, and inclusion space. And one of the things that we have really experienced over these last several months is the focus on diversity and inclusion. And we want to make sure that during these times that we give an opportunity for people to learn and grow as they are learning more and more about this unique and important space. So today we have with us Adam Craddock, who is a visually disabled individual who was born with these disabilities and has overcome them throughout his career. He comes to us with over 15 years of corporate experience, from the Director of Total Rewards to HR operations and ultimately Chief Human Resource Officer. He's also started his career in human capital management and has decided to continue in that vein, focusing in on strategic HR consultant. So at this point in time, I'd like to welcome Adam. Welcome, Adam.
Thank you, Pam. I sure appreciate you having me here, and I'm excited to chat with you today.
Well, we're excited to be chatting with you as well. And one of the things, Adam, that you and I have really spent a lot of time talking about is this whole definition of what diversity, equity, and inclusion mean. And I would really love for you to share your thoughts on what that means.
Well, thanks. What I actually think is that there's been build-up of that definition over time. And I think what we've typically seen in the mainstream is where this has started as defined as race, ethnicity, gender, and veteran status. I think that's the most common of what people, instantly gravitate to. Interestingly enough, I think that's also the key baseline of what companies need to report on their EEO filings every year in terms of their compliance. However, I think, and I'm glad, what we've seen is a rising commentary and importance is adding in things like the diversity of thought and culture and employee backgrounds, experiences, and frameworks and mindsets. So, much more subjective means, if you will. With all that, I will say I'm a little disappointed that over time I've not seen a whole lot of emphasis on the disabled community in the focus and spotlight of these areas. Now, very common, that's also one of the standard questions of EEO data gathering. It's on candidate applications, but to me it's one of those more rote check boxes. And it's something that I hope we continue to see focus on, because it's a very prominent and much more ubiquitous group than many people would think. And as the population continues to grow and age, it's becoming even more prevalent. That's an area where I'd like to see the definition continue to get more spotlight and emphasis as it continues to grow.
Great. And as you were talking, I was thinking of a couple of different things. Yes, obviously there's this focus needs to be placed on disabilities, but you really also talked about thought and culture and, just different experiences. So if you're in the hotel industry, wouldn't it be great to get somebody from, a totally different industry? And that's part of diversity as well. Would you not agree?
I would completely agree. And, there are different schools of thought, and I've experienced this, and I've also participated in this as a hiring executive. I believe that the outsider can be a very constructive force if they come in an appropriate way and if we receive them in an appropriate way. I think somebody coming in who can ask the question why, which I always tell my teams is one of the most important tools that we have. I think asking why is extremely powerful, because we should always be able to try and answer that question. And sometimes we can't. Sometimes we may not know the answer. Sometimes other people are new. And sometimes we've forgotten the answer. And it's okay to say, I don't know. And we have to be okay with that. And we need to make a safe place where there's no penalty for saying that, because that's now an opportunity to review that and say, okay, well, let's decide if we still want to do that. So that's where we turn what might be thought of as a gap into an opportunity. And so outsiders, because they don't have the blinders on, have that ability. Now, there are certainly exceptions where we have very technical positions, very critical roles, things that absolutely do need very industry-specific knowledge, very technical role-specific knowledge, and it would not necessarily behoove us to bring in an outsider. But, I think in many, many cases, that different frame of reference, that outsider and new perspective can be very, very helpful and successful.
Great. What is the difference of diversity, equity, and inclusion before George Floyd and now after George Floyd?
I think that this was a really horrible, very unfortunate event in our history. If we can find any silver lining, I think it's that it has refocused attention on these issues. And I think it actually, unfortunately, goes with another issue, which is the Me Too movement. And so, again, what this has done is put the spotlight on these two key issues, which are the mainstream in diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is on race and gender. And we absolutely now can have a momentum to continue to address these issues and look for ways to remediate it. I will tell you that, again, the readings that I've done and many conversations with colleagues, still, unfortunately, I see and hear a gap. This would be the time to actually use the I word out of the D and I. That's a very increasing part of the human resources, human capital group. Inclusion means, yes, and we should widen that spotlight that the George Floyd and Me Too tragedies have spotlighted. So beyond gender and race, we can and should bring in the other areas where there are issues, discrimination, low representation, bias, and all of those things. And so that your question about what's different before and after, I think I'll reserve judgment. I think there's not necessarily a whole lot of different actions yet. I think and hope that this will serve as the key catalyst to actually generate real action to help move our country forward. That's what my hope is.
So as we close out this podcast, one of the things that I really am looking to make sure that we do is that we educate individuals who may not be able to afford somebody to sit in the diversity, equity, and inclusion seat. What would you say is one of the most important things that they need to focus in on?
I would say that you don't always need to have the top expert, and I've listened to some of the other podcasts, and you have many experts on there. I think there is a degree of D&I and E that smart leaders, senior-most leaders, get inherently. Now, I do think, and one of the very first questions, of course, though, is to decide, is this important culturally to the organization? And I hope, and I think many of us would hope the answer is yes. Now, if the answer is yes, so then what do we do about it? I think, at the very least, education, sponsorship, championship, at the very top of the organization that cascades down is vital. The next piece, I think, is formally advocating this in a company's values system. And the final piece, though, is putting it into the foundation of their cultural behaviors. And that's another little concept that a chief people officer that I worked for, helped me understand and get to. A lot of people equate values and culture to be the same thing. And I think values are an idea, if you will. So diversity is good. We value it. But culture are behaviors, demonstrated, obvious, and explicit behaviors. And that's what your senior leadership needs to do. They need to demonstrate the behaviors by recruiting diverse populations and hiring them, by talking about it routinely and regularly. And, there's a bit of irony, I think, that, if we truly have a diverse and inclusive culture, then we shouldn't have to have a D&I function to try and force the D&I culture. So in some respects, we kind of shoot ourselves in the foot or have the tail wagging the dog. However, in the absence of any D&I culture, we have to start somewhere, and so it's good to, have a rally point. But if we can't have or can't afford a D&I area, then it really does start from the top. And I even say, every CEO is really the chief people officer as well. Mm-hmm. And that is the key leader of the organization. They really need to lead and speak and champion from the top.
Well, Adam, I thank you very much for your time today. I look forward to continuing some of the other conversations that we've had about diversity and inclusion with the team at a later date.
I sure appreciate it. Thank you.